Let's start our event, Economy in 2024, the review of main figures and conversation with Yuliia Svyrydenko. My name is Gleb Vyshlinsky. I'm the Executive Director of the Center of Economic Strategy. Every month we are doing, together with the German economic team, some events that have become for many of you very traditional. During these events, we review the situation on the previous months, but once a year, for the second time in a row, unfortunately, the war is still on and will continue for some period of time. So for the second time, we are doing this yearly event, what has happened over the year. And exactly this peculiarity will take place in two things. Demonstrated, most importantly, that we will have not a very standard format after our regular presentation, which is also not that usual. We will have a special guest, Yuliia Svyrydenko, the first Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, with whom, not in the panel discussion, but rather in interview, we will talk about year 2023 and what we should expect from the economy in 2024. So during such events of CES, we have discussed a lot the issue about the macro financial stability. So we will talk about what is happening in the real sector, what is necessary by the government to develop and support economic activity. And the second, not very traditional, the presentation will also not be very traditional. We will present the picture of 2023, just to understand what is happening, so we could see a little bit some of the forests behind the trees. Our partner is the Economic Pravda, Economic Truth, and as a tradition, I will pass the floor to the short introduction to our partner, Robert Kirchner, who is the Deputy Chief of the German Economic Team. Robert, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Gleb, and a good afternoon and welcome from Berlin to all participants of our event today that is devoted to the Ukrainian economy in 2023, the review of the key figures and a conversation with the first Deputy Prime Minister, Yuliia Svyrydenko, who I'd also like to welcome very warmly and express also my gratitude that she's able to join us today. It is a great pleasure for the German economic team, whose deputy team leader I am, to continue with our excellent cooperation with the Center for Economic Strategy in co-hosting this event today together. We, as many of you know, are an economic policy advisory project that is funded by the German government and has been active for many, many years in Ukraine and in other countries in the Eastern Partnership region, in the Balkans, Western Balkans, and in Central Asia. As we are entering 2024, I think now is exactly the right moment to firstly reflect on the most important trends and developments of the past year, a year where Ukraine started to grow again on an annual basis, on an impressive basis, under still very, very challenging circumstances. And secondly, also to talk about the prospects of the economy, of what is ahead for Ukraine during this year under most probably equally challenging conditions. And to answer these vital questions, I think there is no better qualified person in the country than Yuliia Svyrydenko, who is responsible for economic policy in the government and deserves, in my view, a great personal credit for Ukraine's economic achievements. And I'm very, very excited to be able to listen to her point of view later on. So without further ado, I'd like to give the word back to Gleb, who will moderate the discussion. Gleb, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, and we will now pass on to the presentation. The only thing, one technical aspect that I wanted to pay your attention to, because we have this open interview, everybody will have the possibility to ask questions, at least in Q&A. Partially, some of the questions were raised during registration. I have selected two of these questions, and we have sent them in advance to the service of the first Deputy Prime Minister, so she could be prepared. But also in the online mode, you will be able to ask these questions, please don't write them in chat, write them in Q&A, because in chat there is a lot of technical stuff. So I'm passing the floor to my colleagues, and first of all to Maxim Samolyuk, to our economist who prepared this presentation and who will start to present it. Thank you, Maxim. Thank you, Gleb. Welcome, colleagues. I would like to welcome all of the participants and the viewers of our event. Let me start this. The slides. If everything is seen well, let us start. Today we will look at our standard monthly presentation under a different angle. We have concentrated on those changes that took place over not the previous months only, but throughout all 2023. Most interesting, most important events that took place in the economy, in these sectors that we're looking at throughout 2023. Unfortunately, the war is still on. The war remains the key decisive factor for the economy of Ukraine, and we can't help thinking about it separately. Throughout 2023, on the land, unfortunately, not much has changed. As you can see on this graph, which is depicting the changes in the control of the Ukrainian territory. Unfortunately, Ukraine did not meet its initial counteroffensive goals and failed to liberate much of its territory. Last year, some significant territories were liberated from the Russian invaders, but in 2023, the changes were also minimum. On the other hand, they were also minimum from the other hand. Russians could not get to more of the territory of Ukraine. What is happening in the sea? Ukraine has managed to achieve quite a success. We were able to force Russians out of the Black Sea and to start the Ukrainian Sea corridor, which is very important for the economic stability and for the survival of Ukraine, because it allows to deblock the export not only of grains, which were able to be exported during the grain corridor, but also the exports of other important goods, which really keeps supporting the Ukrainian economy. And in the air, Ukraine throughout 2023 did not give to Russians the possibility to catch the air space. First of all, thanks to the assistance of our partners who have supplied significant high-quality volumes of anti-air defense. Although the recent events show that this is not yet enough, the Russians are trying to still kick Ukraine. So for the stability of economy, we need more. Let's go to the macroeconomic trends. In 2023, the GDP in Ukraine grew at least by 4.9%. This is the forecast of the National Bank of Ukraine. Now, the representatives of NBU say that GDP grew by more than 5% because the evaluation has improved in terms of how things improved, growing of the harvest and some other forecasts. Nevertheless, we can see that still on the graph, the GDP of Ukraine is significantly lower than it was in 2021. In this graph, we could compare the GDP, the quarterly GDP of 2022 and 2023 to the responsible quarters of 2021. And we can see that irrespective of the fact that the economy is reviving, the full recovery is still too early to talk about to the level that it was before the war. In December last year, also we deteriorated, not we, but business deteriorated their expectations in terms of the future of the economy. Nevertheless, if we look at the year in general, then the assessments and the evaluations were significantly higher than in December 2022. Because let me remind you that December 22 was the peak of blackouts when the Ukrainian economy was very much suffered from the Russian attacks on infrastructure, irrespective of the fact that in December 2023 evaluated their prospects in a worse way than in the beginning of the 2023 and the mid of 2023, then we should not forget that the situation is much better than last year, much more stable, much more forecasted than last winter. My part is over at this point. Let me pass the floor to my next colleague. Thank you, Maxim. Yes, I'm passing the floor to Volodymyr, our senior economist, who will say what was happening in individual sectors of Ukraine. Vladimir, please, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. Welcome. Thank you, Gleb. Let us talk about the sectoral analysis. Let us start from the energy sector. That's where we had most of the concern. The main summary of the energy sector is that this sector is working in a very stable mode. Neither the military aggression of the Russian Federation nor the severe frosts of this year could cause any significant deteriorations. Still, 1 day and a half, there were a lot of settlements that were disconnected from the grid, but this was mostly because of the deterioration of the weather conditions, and most of it within 1 day was liquidated, and the energy was restored. In general, if we talk about December 2023, this was the forecasted imports of energy. We imported around 225 gigawatt energy. None of the kilowatt was exported, but still, already on the 2nd of January, we renewed commercial export, and we sent our first kilowatts to Romania and Slovakia. The current consumption is the highest over the present heating season, but since the day is growing more, and taking into account that we will protect ourselves from Russian attacks, I think the second half of winter should be better. Regarding the metallurgy, we can see that in the first half a year, the production of main metal products was stable. Pig iron, steel, and rolled steel were done at the level of 500,000-600,000 tons per month. This is thrice as little as before the pre-war, but much better than last year. Also in December, 521,000 tons of steel was produced, but overall in 2023, the overall steel production decreased by 0.6% to 6.2 million tons. This is explained, this is really very much reaching the indicators of 2021, because March 2023 is already much better than 2022, so things are improving. There are certain careful expectations that exports will continue and will revive, and none of the metallurgical companies is working at 100%. They are at the moment busy with like 70% of their capacity. Shortly about the agrarian center, in December we see the record export of by sea, that's 4 million tons. This is much higher than any month starting from the full-scale aggression, even within the grain corridor. The total volume of agricultural exports grew to 6 million. This is the second. Then in 2 years, grain export by trucks fell to 60,000 tons. Other factors that will improve the growth of agro-export it's the new mechanism of insurance of sea transportation. This can really reduce the price of grain transportation insurance to 1.25%. In general, the Ministry of Economy predicts the growth of agricultural exports will grow by 9% in 2024. That's all from my side. Passing the floor to colleagues. Thank you, Volodymyr. The next part, almost the last one, it's monetary policy. That's Maria Tamirina, who is responsible for this direction. Maria, please, the floor is yours. Welcome, and I hope you can also see me and to hear me. Yeah, everything is good. So let us talk about the monetary policy. In the first place, let us pay attention what was happening on the FX market throughout 2023. It's important to mention that in October last year, the National Bank moved from the fixed FX rate to the managed exchange rate flexibility regime. This was the strategy to soften the FX limitations and moving to a more managed exchange rate flexibility regime. Nevertheless, the regulator controls the situation on the FX market and is a key player on that, compensating the structural deficit with the foreign currency. So the official hryvnia was moving both sides. On the cash market, we saw a gradual revaluation, but then in the end of the year, we had some devaluation. What concerns the international reserves, out of one of the biggest achievements, based on the summary of the year, they grew by 42% and reached 40.5 billion US dollars. This was possible, of course, to the unprecedented financial support which we have received from the European Union, also from World Bank, the United States, Japan, United Kingdom, IMF, and Canada. So the international assistance, together with the placed foreign currency bonds, could help the NBU to compensate the net interventions, to finance the expenditures, to service and repay the public debt, and to really grow the international reserves in order to keep the FX rate further. So as at the 1st of January this year, the international reserves will provide 4 or 5 months of the future imports, although the minimum indicator is 3 months. Let us come to the key rates. The key policy rate decreased over the year from 25 to 15. We were able to get that due to the inflation expectations improvements, faster than expected inflation decline, also the market's adaptation to the new exchange rate, and the key rate will also depend this year on the development of inflation, the situation on the FX market, the volume and rhythm of international assistance, as well as the security situation. Also, in the end of October, the NBU has modernized the operational design of its monetary policy with its lower bound system, so the overnight rate became equal to the key rate. Also, throughout 2023, the yield of one-year hryvnia war bonds declined from 18.5 to 16.8%, in line with the decrease of the key policy rate. The average rates on retail deposits for individuals for 3 and 12 months have been moving within the set level of the key policy rate. That is, they increased to their peak in July, August, and had a tendency with the downward trend till December. What concerns the inflation, in 2023, inflation slowed down to 5.1%. It was 26.6%, and there was a very good harvest, also fixing prices for some communal services, also keeping a very stable FX market and upbeat inflation expectations. The last two items, they also could limit the increase of prices on imported goods. Over the past year, prices have fallen the most among such food products as sunflower and eggs, and non-food goods, clothing and footwear, but the prices have decreased on some other goods such as meat, butter, milk, electricity, ambulatory services, as well as the restaurant and hotel service. However, already in 2024, inflation is expected to accelerate due to the growth of business costs, further revival of consumer demand, and a low base of comparison. with the current forecast that was published in October last year in the inflation report, inflation will go up to 9.8% in 2024. And now what concerns the banking sector, in 2023, the volume of household deposits has increased for term and on-demand deposits, while FX term, after a significant decline, resumed their growth. In general, this growth was not the same. The biggest increase, it was in private banks and the most slow in foreign banks. The dollarization of clients' funds is steadily decreasing, reaching 31.9 in November. That is in pre-invasion levels. Also, with the decrease of the key rate, the level of profitability of deposits decreased, so they slowed down. Nevertheless, the share of deposits still grew, and we could see that it was already in November, it was coming up and up. Also, with the introduction of this flexible rate, we can see that the demand for FX deposits started to become more attractive. So we have quite a moderate balance remaining on the term accounts and current accounts. So yeah, the dollarization of clients' funds is still decreasing, reaching 31.9 in November. Hryvnia deposits have more appeal to the consumers because they have higher rates versus the FX deposits. And if we talk about the revival of economic activity in general over the last months of 2023, we could see the stimulation of demand of business for loans. They grew thanks to the loans in trade and agriculture. We could see that also in contrast to hryvnia lending, FX lending has been stagnating. Since the full-scale invasion, the FX loan portfolio decreased by 1/3. What concerns the loans, the lending, the Affordable Loans 579 program has been really pushing lending, constituting about some 40% of the net corporate portfolio in hryvnia. And the main users were also trade and agricultural companies. In 2023, the banks gave over 26,000 contracts, totaling more than 100 billion hryvnia under such a program. Lending to individually has been steadily recovering since spring of 2023. November was the 9th month of continuous growth of the net credit portfolio of households in hryvnia. We could see that the average rate of growth during this period was about 2.6% every month. And now we can see more lending for real estate and consumer lending. And the main reason is some revival, which is supported by the improved lending conditions and consumer sentiments. And also the last one is the NPL. They were 37% as at December 1st, which means they were growing 0.3 percentage point over the year. But if we look at that in total figures, it's 6.4 billion hryvnia. That's all from my side. Thank you. Yuliia Gaidai, another senior economist who will go over the most difficult question of the state policy, what was happening in the budget. Yuri, the floor is yours. Thank you, Gleb. Let's first start from the foreign financing, which was and is and will stay for the upcoming year as the main focus of our attention. In December, Ukraine received around 5 billion of outside financing. The biggest amounts came 2.2 billion from Japan, also from the European Union, also a tranche from IMF So that gave the possibility to engage $42.5 billion of such foreign financing in overall 2023. This gave us the possibility to cover 71% of the needs in financing, which was significantly more than last year, 56%. The engaged funds, 27%, were in the form of grants, 73% as loans, but these were mostly loans on very favorable conditions. Apart from that, it's important that this year the government Yuri has problem with connection. The government could engage funds to support the economy, and we also see that for a certain months in a row we have the foreign financing, which is not covering all the needs for financing, but that has not yet deteriorated the overall picture. Okay, what we have regarding the tax revenues in December, we have 97.7 billion hryvnia as tax revenues into the state budget. We have, for the first time, VAT revenues exceeded 20 billion hryvnia. We can also see that the domestic VAT revenues remained at the same level for the third consecutive months. At this time, import VAT renewed with the improving of the situation on our land borders. If we see the total picture for the year, the best dynamics versus previous year, its import VAT has really improved, as well as the excises and international trade has helped a lot. At the level with these was the excises and the PAT tax and CPT tax. With this, we can say that the domestic VAT was stagnating, also because its repayment grew with higher pace than the overall revenues. So the overall result equaled the previous year. And if we look versus the evaluation GDP that we will have this year, then the revenues into the state budget, the aggregated tax revenues, they will be 18.2%. This is more or less at the same level that we had in last year, which is 1% less. We don't yet have the local budgets from the what they reached 1% less than previous year. What concerns the expenditures, we can see a very typical picture for this time after invasion. The latest data we have is from November. We have a certain reinstatement of the military spending. They increased because of the increase in procurements. Governance expenses increased to serve the debt by 22.2 billion hryvnia. And in general, we see that in 2023, the defense expenses will exceed most likely 30% of GDP. We should also mention that several more percent, which will go to other functions, what is going to the National Guard and National Police, who are also engaged in the defense of our country. So overall expenditures for the defense will really significantly fulfill 30% threshold. The situation with local budget in November, local budgets went into big deficit. Before that, there was a significant accumulation of proficit of local budgets. Starting from November, this was the time when, for the first time, there was a big deficit because the revenues from the local budgets decreased versus previous months by 1/3. Of course, because of PAT, once the military PAT was extracted, as well as transfers from local budgets, while the expenditures of the local budgets grew, so the accumulated surplus for 11 months is at the level which was based on the results of the previous year. And we can expect, considering the traditional spending spree in the last months of December, that based on the summary of 12 months, this accumulated surplus of local budgets will be still less. That's all what concerns the fiscal policy. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Yuliia. That's all from our presentation, and I would like to pass the floor to Yuliia Svyrydenko. Yuliia also has her own presentation, which the first Deputy Prime Minister would like to share with us, and then we will come to the Q&A. Good afternoon. Many thanks for the possibility of presenting our vision of the economy of Ukraine in the conditions of war. Let us discuss with you both 2023 as well as our forecasts for 2024, also the programs of support which are adopted now, which are included into the budget of Ukraine for this year. Please help me with moving the slides. I think you have my presentation. So let's go to the next slide. In the first place, I would want to start from saying that the second war of the war is ended and our economy is getting more and more peculiarities of the economy of war times. And we have such quality changes which are reflected in the structural amounts, and as well as the quality changes that certify to the fact how the business is adapting and in which way we are moving to the phase of the growth of the economy. Let me start from the quality indicators which are on the surface. We see them all. I believe that that's a good factor, that more than 90 companies that since the beginning of the war stopped their activity, they renewed their activity. We also recollected today about the changes in GDP. And we remember in 2022, we had the fall in GDP was 28.8%. And based on our preliminary assessment, the growth this year will be at the level of 5%. You have already recollected the colleagues from NBU who are forecasting 5.5. So this is this restorative growth. And the biggest recovery rates were shown in public administration and defense. Of course, these are the two areas which are very much priority during the war. First of all, we are talking about the salaries to military, financing our defense capability, quite good pace, the growth in construction, as well as through the investment demand, which was formed because of the significant budget financing for the restoration of the critically infrastructure. And these were the projects both at the regional and at the central level. In agriculture, we also reminded that thanks to the favorable weather conditions, we had good forecasts of almost all cultures. We collected 70 million tons of grains and oilseeds in the trade. This was also good because of the consumer demand and the processing industry, thanks to the demand for the products. Let's go to the next slide. Based on the summary of December, we can say that we had low pace of consumer inflation. In December, the level was at the level of previous months, 5.1%, and comparing with 26.6 in 2022, I would say that this is the lowest level over the last 3 years. Let's go to the next slide. Naturally, and we have also mentioned, this was also mentioned by our previous speaker, the key role in the stability of the country was played by the full-scale financial assistance from our international partners over the 2 years of the full-scale war. The overall assistance was $75 billion US dollars. 67% of funds came from the United States, and this gave us the possibility to cover the first priority needs of the budget, finance the social payouts and the expenditures, and to keep the financial stability. If we were to create the prerequisites for the macroeconomic stability for next year, we can go to the next slide, and let's go to the main challenges that we had to overcome in 2023. Part of them remain actual. For this year, you said it right, the main indicator was the war. The war is still becoming the decisive factor. Another one is the blocking of seaports and limiting the transport, logistics, and export. In order to resolve this question, starting from the 15th of August, we have our own grain initiative, which is alternative to the grain corridor. Why this is important? Because it's covering the possibility to export not only grains, but also to export steel, iron ore, salt. That's a huge number of goods that we were able to export in some alternative ways. We exported 15 million tons, 473 vessels, and 536 ships came in. Also, a very positive effect was done, this action of the duty-free trade with the EU, and this EU free trade agreement should continue. It's very difficult not to recollect our problems with exports and imports connected to blocking of our western border. The figures are very much known, but again, based on the calculation of customs service, the budget in November did not get 9.8 billion hryvnia because of the blocking of the western corridor. And this blocking had a very negative influence on the external trade, but overall in 2023, if we're talking about 2023, we could see the decrease of export by 12.4% compared to January-November 2022. Unfortunately, we have to accept that we had the record trade deficit at the level of $35 billion. Let's go over the next slide. The imports increased, vice versa. Over January and November, it grew by 8.3%, but the dynamics was also changing. When I say about the imports of services, I mean in the first place, the expenses, the expenditures of our citizens abroad. They used to grow, but starting from August to December, they were decreasing, minus 61% versus previous 22. And that exactly was due to the fact that there was a decrease in travels. It was 70% in the import of services in 2023. Of course, this is indirectly, but we should say they could certify that Ukrainians are gradually starting to come back home, although the immigration situation remains very complex and very acute, and based on the calculations of the United Nations, Ukrainians who are abroad, we have 6.5 million. And definitely it is our job as the government to create conditions for the return of Ukrainians home, because it's an important factor for the recovery of the state. But albeit all problems that are generated by the war, there is some positive dynamics for the main macro indicators. That is a good certification that the Ukrainian economy and the Ukrainian business are adapting to the conditions of war and readapting. We can go to the next slide. This is a very good slide, important one. This is the certification to, is what I said, the Ukrainian economy is adapting, and it's very interesting to see to the structure of economy in 2023 and to compare it with the structure in the previous pre-war year 2021, which is always taken as the basis for comparison. I can tell you that this is our analytics, the analytics from the Ministry of Economy, but we have some evident things. First of all, significantly grew the role of the state, and today the leading role is played by the sector of the overall state administration, defense, social services, assistance to business. Based on our estimations over the 9 months of 2023 compared to 2021, the added value share in the state governance increased by 15 percentage point and became 21.2% versus 6.2% in 2021. And summarizing this 5% growth of GDP over the 9 months of 2023, this was also 21.7 increase. This sector is providing this adaptation to the work conditions. That's number one. Number two, the priority of the economy in the wartime is the financing of the investment into the defense industry. We also have quite a shift in the side of growing the investment component of GDP. Again, over the 9 months of 2023, and we compare it with 2021, the share of main capital of GDP grew by 3.9 percentage points to 17.1, thanks to the funds of state financing. And as a consequence, we have for 2023, we have the accelerated growth of the machine building complex, which is readapting to the production of defense products, the products which is necessary to also rebuild Ukraine. And also the share of machine building, you can see that it's growing by 1.1 percentage point versus 2021 to reach 6.8%. The economy of the military times, it's also the changes in consumption. Ukrainians are postponing the goods, the purchase of goods which are not the first priority, so we can fix the structural decrease in household consumption over the 9 months of 2023. The share of consumption of households decreased to 63.3%. Another indication of the economy of war when we have more than 6 million of Ukrainians who are abroad. The immigration situation, which we are discussing right now, it also demonstrated in the shift of imports of goods and imports of services in the overall volume. Based on the data of NBU, over the 9 months of 2023 versus 2021, the share of imports grew to 29.2%. So our shifts, which we have shown you on the slides, from the one hand, they show how the economy is readjusting and adapting to the conditions of war, but from the other side, it also says which losses are borne by the economy. In parallel to reaching the first position of the military sectors, to outsiders, we have the sectors which used to be leaders before the war. Especially we talk about metallurgy, the industry which was having leading positions before the full-scale invasions, but with all of the ruining, with all of this destruction, this deteriorated logistics really caused a significant gap of this sector and significant decline. So the share of the industrial products by 7.9 percentage points is less than in 2021. Nevertheless, these shifts, these are the mechanisms of survival. The leaders in demand are changing, the leaders in production are changing. Some industries are more adapting to the challenges of the war. And I believe it's the role of the business And the role of the state is exactly in finding these instruments and mechanisms, how to support the development of business and to prevent losses of the available capacities. Therefore, this work on logistics, on making sure that we can go over the export limitations, supporting business, these are our main priorities. I would also like to call our partners inside the country, first of all, National Bank, to help solve the problem with the redistribution of financial flows in Ukraine. Because if you look at one of such significant shifts in the distribution of profit in the economy of war, you can see that the financial sectors that is creating only 3% of GDP, they have received more than 30% from the profits of big and medium-sized companies. Until pre-war times, this share was some 10%. This is unfairness that has to be taken care of, and the way to solve it is, of course, is to start actively participating of the financial sector in lending, in insurance of the war economy. I believe that this is a very important condition to make sure we would renew. If we go to the next slide, I will quickly go over the forecasts. We have demonstrated them several times to CES audience. I think the last one was in December, so I will not go that deeply. Let me just once again reiterate our main assumptions that the war will continue in 2024, so our objective would be to provide as much defense capacity as possible. The growth of GDP is forecasted at the level of 4.6%. Then I would say that let's go quicker. I don't want to talk a little bit more about that. There is the need for continued financial support, the growth of the investment, and the investment in 2024 versus 2023, they will grow based on our assumptions by 29.6%. That will really improve the situation with GDP. And the second place is the private consumption. We hope that Ukrainians will continue to return, and the biggest number of Ukrainians, up to 1.5 million people, can return in the end of 2024. Also in 2024, we are forecasting partial gradual recovery of the domestic consumption, and the investment demand will increase, which should really positively affect on the dynamics of goods consumption. It's important in 2024 to gradually improve the logistics. So in 2024, if we are talking about inflation, I think it's on the next slide, that it will not exceed the indicator of last year. A very complex will be the situation on the labor market. The level of unemployment is forecasted at a quite high level, 18.7%. Therefore, at this, I would stop, and I would really love to go to Q&A. Thank you, Yuliia. Many thanks. Very quickly, because we have various questions of various types, and let's go over them. I want to tell you in advance that in Q&A we have very narrow sectoral questions, and as far as I know, the representatives of the service of the first vice premier are in Zoom. All of these bottleneck questions, they will be collected to be worked on, and if necessary, you can come back to those associations and sectoral representations where there are some really narrow questions. I think they will not be very much interesting to the whole audience. That's a technical issue. And now let's go to the questions which are, first of all, from me, and then we will also add questions that will be coming up in the Q&A I, as the moderator, will pick several of them and also some questions from the registration. Yuliia, you have already talked about the indicators, the reasons for growing in 2023. Let us quickly, from figures, let's go back. No, not come back, but let us look at the state policy, because the role of the government in these difficult conditions is exactly to try with some limited instruments in the conditions of war to still improve the economic activity. What are your lessons learned in 2023? What has worked well, maybe better than you expected from the initiatives that you're responsible for in the government and that were initiated by the government? And what probably worked worse and what is forecasted in 2024? Thank you. You're absolutely right, unfortunately, that we have a limited set of instruments connected with the limited possibilities of the budget, but that 40 billion of hryvnia that is put in the budget for the support, we, in essence, all the programs that were in 2023, we are keeping them because they showed significant effectiveness, like 579 program. I would say that this is the program that by 90% that we have implemented this. So for 2024, this program will stay. We are changing the focus to processing and also changing the focus of supporting investment projects, expanding the limit to 150 million hryvnia, and also changing some interest rates for agrarians, for the agricultural producers, for defense, it will be 13%. And for the production companies, for the processing, this will be even 9%. I mean, 579. Then we have quite active in 2023. We will have grant programs of support of like Rabota and grant work for processing companies, because I think this is the program that will open up, in general, will open up one of the main ideas of the economic policy of our government. That's the simulation of products with added value. When in some of your questions, I also read that there is some criticism that the grant programs, they are relaxing entrepreneurs and they are getting used to work on the grant funds. I would not agree to that, but because our grant programs foresee traditionally co-financing or return of the received money in the way of taxes. So the grant will be 600. It's for the amount of 3.3 billion hryvnia of grant programs and 1,000 grants for processing with the co-financing with business will be disbursed 50-50. These are the conditions for the whole territory of Ukraine, and for the occupied territories, it's 80-20 ratio. So I believe we should further improve the policy related to localization, because thanks to this policy, I believe that the Ukrainian school children, that we have not the Ukrainian, not the Turkish buses, but the Ukrainian buses. So localization should be the basis of all of it. You have seen the structure of GDP. You have seen what that we have to focus on from the point of view of consumption to the Ukrainian goods produced. We will reinstate the program of compensation of machinery of local production, agricultural machinery. We have funds in 2024 because some point in time in the past, I remember it doubled the number of own production and helped launch own production agricultural machinery. So we have to expand, and it would be very much desirable to increase not only agricultural machinery, but all types of equipment produced in Ukraine. We could, in last year, increase the number of industrial parks. I think we have 70 for the time being, although in the register you can see 70, but in fact the working ones are 10. So this year we will concentrate on we have funds on the compensation of connecting to this existing. So we hope to have 5 more innovative working industrial parks this year. And our policy is the more we will produce home products at home, the more resilient will be the Ukrainian economy, because for each hryvnia spent for the Ukrainian goods, 40% will be returned to the budget. So it's already in this year, the state authorities, and I really hope that Ukrainians in their procurement will give preference to the Ukrainian goods exactly for that purpose. And we have been really working hard on formulating this programs of support and to foresee this money. You say, what was effective? 579 grants, the mortgage program, they gave the GDP effect to 1.5% of GDP. This 40 billion hryvnia that we have put inside for the support of the Ukrainian business for 2024, they will give us a summary of 1% GDP. So our job is to make sure that all the funds that we have prepared in the way of grants, loans that should work for the Ukrainian economy. And definitely in 2024, we will be concentrating, as I said, on the defense complex. Our job is to create joint venture defense companies with international partners to localize production of arms and ammunition and demining equipment. Therefore, when we say defense complex, the very specific figures, creating some 50 companies of this complex, as well as deblocking of export. This is a huge work that will continue this year. Again, very quickly. Thank you. I would also like to specify regarding 579. From the one hand, you said that the scale of this support program 579 is quite big for this year. The Ministry of Economy is one of the big managers for these funds at the expense of this program as well. 579 program had some questions raised by IMF, whether this scale is resilient. This was the only structural beacon that was brought an agreement from IMF was transferred from 23 to 24. Can you detailize a little bit what was the outcome when our government communicated with our international partners? So in which edition we can still keep the influence on the in terms of the influence, but to make it even more resilient from the macroeconomic point of view. I believe that this is one of the most active programs, which is in the set of instruments for the government. 90-95% of loans is disbursed exactly through this program. What we agreed with IMF, this program should be targeted for the small and medium-sized business. We are supported by all partners that the emphasis should be on stimulating processing and stimulating investment, because if you remember, the burst of this program appeared during the COVID times as the challenge for COVID and was aimed at overcoming the crisis. But now we clearly understood, and this is very much discussed with partners, that there will be a focus on the processing industry, on the investment into the real sector, and on investing in the real business. And they agree with us on that. So we keep the component for the deoccupied territories as an anti-crisis component where we have the biggest need. But on other territories, you have to stimulate the development. What concerns the agrarian sectors, this will be 13% and 9% for the processing. And the loan limits will be increased to 150 million hryvnia. This is something that we have discussed with IMF. They are supporting us because one of the jobs that we are looking at together with partners, with our colleagues, is how Ukraine should become self-sufficient, and that is only possible at the expense of stimulating internal production at the expense of stimulating the development of the Ukrainian economy. Therefore, as you say, IMF, yeah, they understand that, they support us. They understand this shift of focus to investment and processing. Thank you, Yuliia. Let us go back from this short-term instruments of support. Let's come to the more long-term policies, how to support investment. One of the important directions for anyone who is following the Telegram channels of the Ministry of Economy, I would actually promote it because it's very much clear what the ministry is doing, what priorities are there, is the insurance of the investment during the war. This is the topic which is more than 1 year. The government, the experts actively raised, and as far as I understand, throughout the year we had a certain progress. So it's important, in a few words, also to go over how the government has supported the experts that went by sea and to which extent the insurance is needed, or it will even increase next year, and some more long-term questions. What is the potential now concurred by the government with partners in terms of insurance of investment and trading projects from war risks? Thank you. I would like to tell you my political message related to the insurance of war risks. I don't think for the international investor, the insurance of war risk will give a 100% guarantee and will be a stimulus to come to Ukraine and during the war to start own business. Nevertheless, this product can give certain comfort for the investor and prevent destruction. I mean, not to prevent destruction, but to get the compensation for the destroyed property during the war. Yes, we are working really with several institutions who are proposing both to international investors and Ukrainian investors the possibility to be insured from war risks. Over the 2 years of the war, MIGA, the Agency of Guaranteeing Investment, finally issued the first guarantee for the investment in 2023 to the industrial park in Lvov. Now this agency is working on engaging additional funds to a special fund, and Japan, Norway, and UK joined it. The American JFC is also proposing this product, and we're expecting from them that, as they promise us throughout several months, they will finance 5 projects in Ukraine with the total amount of $380 million US dollars. And now I know that $25 million will be coming from another company for the risks. EBRD is working on the mechanism of insurance on the road. We are also working on that with them. And one of the most important decisions is the expansion of the Export Credit Agency of Ukraine. Now this agency can insure from war risk the direct investment of Ukrainian companies in Ukraine, as well as to issue policies for the investment loans, for the creation of companies and the infrastructure necessary for the processing industry and for the export of goods. But to make sure that this mechanism would work in full scale, we are working on the legislative framework, but this additional financing we are raising with donors, the donors coordination platform, and the export credit agency has become the mechanism of ensuring the vessels in the Black Sea. You've also mentioned this mechanism today. It's very important that this mechanism can be spread not only on insurance of vessels which are bringing in the agricultural products, but also other goods. Also, we have the support from the export credit agencies, 14 ECA. They have insurance instruments for the support of Ukraine, And 5, another export credit agencies from the world. They're working to make sure that such instrument would be implemented. So altogether, 35 projects throughout these 2 years are supported through the export credit agencies. For instance, Germans, they are the producer of materials from the government of Germany has received the loan of 12 million euro for the production of a factory in Ukraine. So MIGA, EFC, Ukrainian export agencies, and 14 international export agencies that have this insurance mechanism for the support. Thank you. Quite a wide spectrum, and the scale is quite pleasant to hear. Let us wait until these agreements are finalized. Yeah, of course, at least we have such a commitment. Okay, for those who will ask questions, I would like to go over some global strategic questions in order not to ruin such logic, but then we will go over the smaller ones, but are still important in the Q&A. So this continuation from insurance of external risks to our internal risks. If we look at the Ukrainian Forbes, if we read it, and the magazine, the last edition, the more, unfortunately, we have more to hear about the pressure from the law enforcement bodies to business. More complaints are coming to the ombudsman. Over the last year, the Ministry of Economy was working really well, but the perception, we don't have such an expression that we have a breakthrough. We have an impression that the law enforcement bodies, they don't understand until the very end what they should be actually doing during the war. And this is very much too much emphasis on the white business. You're not only the Ministry of Economy, you're also the first Vice Premier. So what is the vision of the government? What can you do? What is your plan in this respect? Let me talk openly with you. You know how many instruments we have implemented to support business. Of course, such cases when the law enforcement are coming to business, to the white business, that brings to zero all of our efforts. So we, as nobody, are interested in making sure that we would find the possibility, and I believe that it should be regulated in a legislative framework, how to streamline their work, and one of the systematic decisions should be exactly the development of the special project, national project. It should foresee that the searches can only be done only if the business ombudsman is present and the representatives of the Bureau of Economic Security to initiate checks of the financial business activity or to initiate revisions. This is the right that should be only kept by BEP, Bureau of Economic Security, with the participation of international experts, and BEP should be voted by international experts and Ukrainian businessmen, and they should be doing this every 2 years. So when the law is effective, the BEP management should be attested, and when they refuse to do the polygraph, that will mean that should be dismissed. So we hope that this draft law will be registered in the Verkhovna Rada in the closest several weeks, and we should be moving in that direction. Because you said a lot about the deregulation, it is happening in parallel to all of these processes. And really, if you look at over the whole year, we have looked at 1,300 permissions, and we recommended regarding 450 to cancel. More than 500 we already have done, and more than 100 of permissions that were interfering the entrepreneurs, they already canceled. So I see this dominating headache is this checks, not the regulation. So I believe in 2024 we should focus on register this draft law on Bureau of Economic Security and to regulate their activity in such a way to make sure, as I already said, that sometimes these bodies would really bring to zero the work of all the state. Thank you, Yulia. For the protocol, I will say that our colleagues from the civil society who are working with this topic, they are not really agreeing with this draft law which is prepared by the state. I understand that there will be a big discussion how to optimally, technically reach those objectives that you're talking about. Good. Yeah, I think we will register it, and according to the regulation, there will be the possibility to, within 2 weeks, to make a discussion, to send some alternative. This draft law, together with the business associations, we have also discussed. So it seems to me that it has to be improved as much as possible to finalize it, to make sure it would do its job. And it's important that it's adopted and it's working. Another question from the ground, I also have seen in your personal and in the ministry, social media, that you have traveled a lot over the last months in the companies in the Dnipropetrovsk region, like none of us. You, from one hand, you are combining the macro vision and you were on the ground talking to businesses who are developing throughout the war. What is your more or less emotional perception? What is exactly missing in the regions that have a huge potential, industrial potential, but they are like Nikopol under permanent fire? How can you help them? Yes, you're absolutely right. We are traveling a lot in Ukraine, and we are building the logistics in such a way to be also in the deoccupied territories, to look up the problems, which problems are there, how they're different. We, in order to prepare systematic decisions, in order to help the Ukrainian business to work. But because I believe that the Ministry of Economy, our shareholder is the Ukrainian business and the Ukrainian entrepreneurs. So it's very important for us to keep our hand at our pulse to understand which main problems are there with our entrepreneurs who are in very difficult conditions of working, and they have to export, to develop. So I would like to say that during the meetings with the Ukrainian entrepreneurs from my side, they are started always, and I take this opportunity also taking this floor at your event. I would like to say words of gratitude. That's most important. That's the message that I have for each Ukrainian entrepreneur who is working in Ukraine, preserving jobs. And of course, there are problems. If we systematize them, we can distribute them in such a way. Access to financing. The commercial banks, unfortunately, they are not very much eager to do the lending or don't do the lending at all. And again, I say it's unfortunate that the state has to take this function. We're meeting the banks, we're taking banks to our regional travel in order they can really reinstate lending, build up some special conditions. Number two, if we are talking about the frontline regions, the question is about the recovery of the damaged or destroyed property. That is also the issue for the compensation of losses for the damaged or destroyed property. We were in Kharkiv, Kherson, Mykolaiv Oblast. For them, most acute is the issue of demining. That's a huge problem that Ukraine will have to fight. Let me talk very carefully, at least another 10 years. 208,000 hectares have returned. We do have certain progress with this, because I remember really well 2023, we started from very miserable figures. In 2023, we didn't have any heavy machinery for demining. It simply didn't exist in Ukraine. We had 6 operators of the demining activity, and we had only 1,000 specialists of explosive specialists if we take private and state companies. The new year, we started already with more than 30 heavy machinery for demining, 26 operators, and 3,000 explosives specialists. We've also received commitment from partners that will help us with the humanitarian demining, and they will give us financial support in this. I will not be saying wrong things. I think demining and then access to financing. So we do have the resolution 76, with which the government is, 76 resolution is defining strategically important companies. This question is always raised by the companies, considering how you can really book the deficit specialities, rare professions, and the mobilization questions. This is from our latest trips to the Dnipropetrovsk region. Thank you. And let me come to some important questions related from our audience. And in the end, in order to end up with something big, then I will ask a question about the plan which we are discussing with the European Union and which we are discussing with the United States and our international partners, the plan of the big growth. So let us come to these smaller questions and to the responses of the audience. We have 15 questions, 15 minutes to what Yuliia has said during your performance. So you have recollected about the problems on the Polish border, famous problems. Very good question is from the registration. Did the ministry analyze to which specific markets it's possible to influence, and can this blockade influence for agriculture? You recollected the question about fuel, about seeds, about machinery for agriculture. Does the ministry see any problems to which in some way the business has to be prepared because it's grown? Remember how the fuel market was unstable after the shelling. You can still prepare to that and to understand what will be the influence on the economy. I would also like to say regarding this blockade on the Polish border, it produced really a negative influence for import rather than export. For exporters, of course, naturally, we also had some losses, but they were less substantial than for the importers because we had the alternative corridor. We could really cover up these losses by aligning a new sea corridor. So with this Polish border, it's clear. It's a clear situation for us. I'm afraid after this fuel crisis, what the entrepreneurs should be prepared for. We have to deblock the border. We're working with various methods, including diplomacy. We're analyzing which other steps we should take in order to resolve this crisis. But again, I believe that it's exactly the stable logistics by sea. It's a very important reason and solution, and of course, improving other logistical routes that would make hedging. That is the answer to the question how to correctly build up the work in 2024. Clear? Thank you. There were several questions in Q&A related to your forecasts about the return of the refugees. What are you based on when you say that 1.5 refugees can come back? What can really help that? Our macro forecasters about 1.5 million. I'm like you. I also raise this question to our economists. There is an assumption and there are some calculations that there are some evident factors that Ukrainians will come back home. First of all, it's improving the security situation, and it's very much dependent on the supply of ammunition from our international partners. There is this second factor. It's more psychological and financial. It's the feeling of being tired. for Ukrainians who live abroad, because living abroad really does have a significant financial burden. So these people who have left from 6.5 million and who wanted to live abroad, it's very much clear. So for the many of them, that's a very forced solution, and they do have the desire to return. We have seen that some of the people made some attempts to return. They stayed until the summer. Some continued to stay abroad, but some really decided to stay in Ukraine. So using these two main indicators, improving the security situation and feeling of being tired of living abroad and a significant financial burden, these two things, three things will influence that. So we are doing a lot of work. Which are the conditions of the we know which conditions were offered to the Ukrainian citizens by which countries, so we can also propose the countermeasures. In the first place, we understand that people need improvement of the security situation, improving the situation with housing, jobs, social infrastructure provision. So for all of these directions, we continue to work. We, as the Minister of Economy, I can tell you that we have started the mortgage program. 6,500 mortgages already disbursed. We expect in the second reading the adoption of the law that will improve e-restoration, and mortgages could be combined. So this certificate for the e-recovery could be the advance payment for the mortgage. You know that this e-recovery certificates already have been started in order to speed up this market. Regarding the jobs, it's also partially, it's our profile, and we are doing this. And definitely what I said, the infrastructure and the security situation. Thank you. That was a good macroeconomical question. I don't know how you have analyzed it, because it's quite difficult. What regarding the connection with the received international assistance, with the growth of the real GDP, to which extent, apart from these macro-financial concerns that we have related to the possible decrease of the volume of support, did you count what it was the influence on consumption? Because you understand this assistance helps to finance bigger payouts for the support of the armed forces, and definitely they also are reflected with consumption. Let me reformulate. Would we be successful with our internal resources in case this support is decreased to provide, to make sure that the economy would be kept at a stable level during active hostilities? I can tell you what we have done. We didn't calculate that. We want to be self-sufficient in terms of finances. This is a high priority for this year. So we have developed Ukrainian facility, and the plan with our American colleagues, considering this particular job, in which way you can increase revenues, in which way you can decrease the percentage of the price market of Ukraine, in which way we can legalize a bigger number of self-employed employees and employed employees, which sectors will give the biggest influence on growing GDP, what we should focus in the short-term perspective to make sure, as you say, we could more financially independent. I would say self-sufficient, because you're absolutely right in a way that evidently the last year, 42.5 billion of international assistance, that's a significant amount of money. Let's also, in a few words, regarding the ideas that are put inside the program, which is transferred, as far as I understand, to the European Union institutions. It was approved by the government in the end of last year. This particular document is not yet public. It will be made public already after it's considered by our partners. But the main ideas you can already speak about in order to understand that everybody would understand what is hidden by these diplomacy lines, which we see from the Ministry What are the ideas behind? Let us put it this way. What is the Ukraine facility? That is the plan for 4 years that foresees a number of measures, reforms, which we as the state have to implement to make sure to grow with bigger pace than average in Europe. Also, this plan envisages the list of sectors, which you also know we had conversations with the public sector, with business associations, these sectors who will give us the biggest boost for economic growth. First of all, it's energy, industry, transport, IT, agrarian. Why these sectors are mentioned? Because financing of 50 billion is the financing not only for the direct budget, it's also guarantees, this 8 billion of euro guarantees to make sure that the corresponding institutions could give lending or grant funds with the focus on 20 sectors because they give the biggest influence. In this plan of reform, we have the reform. I mean, there are many of them. Decentralization reform, the reform of remuneration for the public officials, also the state property privatization reform, the corporate reform. So the plan is as follows. We hope that on the 1st of February, the European Union will make the necessary decision to make sure to allocate to us 50 billion of funds. After that, there will be a discussion exactly about the credit facility, and we will come with its publication. There is nothing there that you would not know about it. We would love to improve business environment for the future. We want to continue privatization. We want to strengthen human capital, and that is reflected in the number of reforms and measures that we as the government will be implementing. We want, as already said, to finalize and complete the decentralization reform and to make even more effective regional policy. We have a section that will pertain to financial markets and management of state assets very quickly. That's what's in Ukraine position. Do I understand it right that this is more or less a joint plan which is discussed with the United States, this particular strategy of quick development? Yes, it is a joint plan to discuss with our partners, and we have presented it at the multi-donor coordination platform in which all donor countries are participating that help Ukraine to go through this very difficult way. So if the question is whether our international partners are informed, of course, they have seen the list of reforms, the list of measures that we as the state would like to do in the next 4 years. Why I'm focusing on these general questions, because very often, you know it very well, over the period of your time in the office, there is this claim that the government doesn't have the vision, that the government doesn't have the economic strategy. That's why I was trying to dig into it, at which stage this preparation is for this vision. And I would put it this way, Ukraine facility, it's the plan for 4 years. That's the strategic vision of the government for the upcoming 4 years. This is one document. The other document, the one we're discussing with partners, is some short-term steps that we have to implement throughout 2024 that will give some additional growth for the Ukrainian GDP. Why are we discussing this with partners? Because partially this will require their engagement. For instance, this short-term plan, it foresees, first of all, confiscation of these sovereign frozen assets. For this, we need the voting of the law. In the United States, we need the political decision of the European Union, of the confiscation of these frozen assets, then the expansion of export and the improvement of the transportation communication. For that, we need partners from the European Union. The third aspect is the expansion of our energy capacity, because if we are going to be active and will expand the alternative corridor, at some point in time, our metallurgical companies will lack energy capacity, and for that we need very specific projects, such as the development of interconnectors that we would like to start to implement already this year. We want to return Ukrainians. This is one of the items of the plan for this year. We want to develop companies of defense, because our calculation says that 300 billion hryvnia in the budget. If we localize at least part of this, let us put it this way, half, this will improve additional growth of GDP by 3%. I think this could be a locomotive for growth, and that's important for the economy of Ukraine, as well as for the defense capacity improvement. Therefore, defense and implementation of those 5 common joint projects that I mentioned during our today's conversation, it's exactly, let's put it this way, it's our tactical plan for this year. And the engagement of investment into the economy of Ukraine in these sectors that give the possibility to produce goods with added value. I will continue to repeat that, because the share of processing in GDP of Ukraine in 2021 was only 8%. There are no successful rich raw materials economies. That should be the state policy, and this idea really diminishes all our state programs of support. That's why we are expanding 579 for processing. We are expanding grant programs for processing. That's why we're engaging, asking partners to engage with grants to processing, because investment in processing is strategic objective and the tactical assignment for this year. Many thanks, Yulia, for your time. Many thanks for telling us in detail very practical priorities for this year, because as usual during such meetings there are a lot of questions with some concrete regulations, problems, relationship between business, which are important to consider. Your service is seeing this. We will pass these questions on to you, to your service. But main thing, once again, thank you, and I would like to wish you success in making sure that all of us together could make it all possible what you are planning, and to reach the results that over the year we would again talk about good growth in 2024. Many thanks. Many thanks for your conversation, and we will meet over the Ukraine facility, and we will talk in more detail about not the short-term plan, but a huge plan for 4 years, that business would find additional instruments for growth. Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Hello.